Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my rant on the Mr. Plinkett review of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, before I go any further, I want to give a special shout out to Vontae for requesting this video. And I know he asked me to do a live stream, well, not necessarily a live stream, but just a reaction video to the review. And I initially was planning on doing that, but I've been starting to feel a little bit under the weather lately, and I didn't really feel that I had enough energy or enough left in the tank to do like an hour-long video with just me just having off the cuff, off the top of my head thoughts about the video. And also, when I was watching it, I realized that I had a lot to say, and there was a lot for me to break down. So I felt that a video like this would actually do it justice more. So I hope you still enjoy the video, Vontae, and I hope it was still worth the wait. And if there's another topic you'd like to see me discuss, or a review of a film or a show you would like to see me tackle or cover in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. A link will be in the video description. I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. And this review in particular, to me, is easily the worst of the Plinkett reviews, and honestly one of the worst videos that Red Letter Media has done to date. I didn't like this video when it first came out in 2006. And it was originally uploaded in 2 parts. And that was from a time when I was a fan of the Plinkett reviews. I saw the Star Wars prequel reviews and I really enjoyed them. And so I was looking forward to this, even though I did like Indiana Jones 4. I saw in the theater that year. It's one of my favorite films from that year. It still is. I still wanted to see the Plinkett review, maybe for some, fun laughs, or maybe just to see what Plinkett and Mike's thoughts were on the film. Because keep in mind, folks, this is around the time when the Plinkett reviews, that was the moneymaker for Red Letter Media. It was not the half in a bag stuff. In fact, there were jokes about stop making half in the bag. We don't give a shit about half in the bag. We want more Mr. Plinkett. And this was also the time when Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull became a very popular punching bag on the internet. So Mike was getting all these comments, all these requests from people to do a video on this movie. Excuse me. Just thinking about this review just gives me a bit of indigestion. But yeah, he was asked numerous times to do this video. And I think eventually just caved, and this is the end result. Because this is just such a half-assed, poorly put together review. It doesn't really have the same genuine vitriol or hate that you could feel for the Star Wars prequels and the Star Wars prequel reviews. Nothing really feels that honest, except for maybe a few statements here and there. And even the humor isn't even that funny. Most of it is just bad. And in fact, a lot of the review isn't even any humor. There really isn't that many jokes. And it just really feels like, after all these years, this was a video that was made out of an obligation. It was made because Plinkett pays the bills, and Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is the next punching bag. That's really what it plays out like. Because so much of this review is just riddled with inconsistencies, contradictory statements, criticisms that are incredibly weak or just half critiques, and just the same cliched hot takes when it comes to this film. And when you put it all together, it's an incredibly difficult review to sit through, and it's, in my personal opinion, an awful video. And I know people are going to disagree. And I know there's a lot of people who say, who are you? You're nobody. Red Letter Media has more subscribers and views than you will ever have. And I get it. But this is my channel, and I was asked to share my thoughts on this video, and here we are. And my honest thoughts are this review sucks. This is a piece of shit. And I'm surprised more people haven't criticized this particular review. I really am. Because it's that bad. So it starts off on the wrong foot with Plinkett comparing Indy 4 to The Phantom Menace, saying it's the most disappointing film since that movie. And I'm like, really? It's the most disappointing film since The Phantom Menace? It's more disappointing than Attack of the Clones? I don't understand how that's really a truthful statement. That this is the most disappointing film since The Phantom Menace. That felt like a portion of the script that was put in there because of the outrage that was spreading throughout the internet when it comes to this movie, to just appeal to a certain base. That's really what that came across like. Because I failed to see how this was more disappointing than episode 2. He calls the film a giant rolling turd while he's showing footage of the boulder and raiders. Okay, typical. Remarks about the 5 seconds of the CGI monkeys like it's some crime against humanity, like so many other critics did at the time and still do. It's not a good scene. It is cringe. It is bad. But to me, it's not even remotely close to being one of the worst scenes in cinema. Because for one, it's extremely short, and two, it doesn't really do anything to really affect the film in terms of the plot. It doesn't affect the movie detrimentally when it comes to the character of Indiana Jones. It's just a dumb scene that lasts for like 30 seconds. To me, that sequence is in the same vein as the raptor dream scene in Jurassic Park 3, where the raptor says Alan, where people just overblow and overhype how bad those scenes are. But yeah, of course he has of course he had to have a scene in the review where he's remarking to that scene. Oh my god! Then he has a vile, edgy joke about masturbating to the Olsen twins, which has nothing to do with Indiana Jones. And I don't even see what's funny about it. I get that's the shtick of Mr. Plinkett as a character. He's an edgelord. He's a sadistic sicko. But I don't see what the punchline is. I don't see what the joke is. He just furiously comes on his TV because he really likes the Olsen twins. It just I'm like, I'm not a prude or anything, but when it comes to that kind of stuff, like, give me a punchline. Like, actually, just shock humor is not enough for me. And I think a lot of people laughed at it because of just how disgusting and random and crazy it was, or it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's good comedy or clever comedy writing. To me, that's lazy shit. That's shitty comedy. That's the lowest common denominator when it comes to comedy writing, is the shock humor. And then he just takes a lot of shots at Karen Allen for some reason. He did that not just this one time early in this video. He does it throughout the video. Like he has some grudge against Karen Allen. Takes shots at her. Gives her a lot of flack for potentially working in a toll booth before doing the movie, which I don't know if that actually is accurate or if that's just a joke that he made at her expense. Either way, it's lame. Then he shows footage of the behind the scenes interviews when it comes to the movie, and he's talking about the origin of the film, and is just dunking on Lucas, making fun of Lucas, just shitting on him, because he's the easiest target imaginable. And then when Lucas is trying to actually say something that is actually worthwhile when it comes to the context of the movie, and he's trying to explain the 50s B movie homages that he was trying to go for or trying to do with the film, he tells him to shut up, and then he talks over him with even worse ideas. Like, this is the moment where the review truly becomes a bad critique. It becomes really atrocious to me because it's instantly invalidated because of the fact that he's doing this whole shtick with going after George Lucas, talking about how stupid he is, and then he provides his ideas that are supposedly so much better, and they suck so much. Here are his ideas that are supposedly better than the 50s B movie homages and the aliens and the UFOs and the ancient alien stuff and so on. His first idea that he throws out there is that because Indiana Jones is fighting the Russians, he should go to Russia or Siberia and try to find some obscure Russian artifact that nobody's ever fucking heard of. Then the second idea that he thinks is better is even worse. Have Indiana Jones come out of retirement to stop a super weapon. I'm not making that shit up. That's actually in this video. I have the video in the video description. I have the link to the video in the video description. You could watch it for yourself and see what I mean. Have Indiana Jones come out of retirement to stop a super weapon. This isn't James Bond. You kidding me? There's nothing. Why would you fucking do that? Why would you even suggest that that's a good idea, let alone a good idea for an Indiana Jones movie? That's the most generic shit imaginable. So you were supposed to take this guy seriously as a critic. And I understand Plinkett's an over-the-top character, but never to the extent where he's making claims and throwing out ideas that are deliberately terrible. Like, that wasn't really the point of the character. I don't remember that being the case in the Star Wars prequel reviews. So here, he has these ideas that are supposedly so much better than George Lucas because he's so much smarter than he is, and he's so much better than he is, and he knows more about what he's talking about than George Lucas, and one of his ideas is that Indiana Jones would come out of retirement to stop a super weapon. A concept that has nothing to fucking do with archaeology whatsoever. Genius statement. Genius ideas. Then he complains about UFOs and aliens being in the movie, the first of countless times. Then he tries to explain the formula of the franchise. And he starts out okay, saying it's about adventure, pulp cultures of the time. It's a homage to old adventure serials of the 30s. But then he starts talking about Indy 4 and how it handled the formula. And then he starts confusing the hell out of me. Because he starts talking about how it was a film that was made for the masses and for mass consumption and so on and so forth. And then he goes in and starts talking about how it was just not risky enough. Like, he points out how after all of his time, they needed to take risks, and he was okay with the fact that they did take some risks with the whole alien stuff and so on. But he then mentions how it wasn't risky enough, how it should have strayed even farther away from the formula and not even had as many elements of a pulp adventure movie. Which I'm like, so you're a guy who's supposedly supposed to be a voice of reason when it comes to a good Indiana Jones movie, and here you are talking about how the fourth film should have been as completely different from an Indiana Jones movie as possible. So after that bout of confusion when it comes to the review, then he talks about how the film doesn't work because it carries over adventure pulp aspects. So he doubles down on this just asinine reason to criticize the movie. That, oh, the Indiana Jones film is an Indiana Jones movie and that's a problem. And then he rants about the film not being a 50s B movie because that's what George Lucas and Spielberg were talking about when it comes to the style or the approach to the film, is that it's like a 50s B movie. And then he just rants about it not being exactly a 50s B movie. Like, oh, if it was a 50s B movie, it would have an alien invasion, and there'd be people who would be hanging out in rooms with all these dials, and scientists would be featured prominently, and there would be, you know, death rays or lasers or something like that. And I'm like, it's not just a 50s B movie, you dolt. Like, it's a adventure pulp film like the other films in the series, because it's Indiana Jones with elements of a 50s B movie. It's not just a 50s B movie. That was never what Lucas was intending to do. Never what anyone involved with the film was intending to do, is just make a 50s B movie with Indiana Jones in it. It's an Indiana Jones film with 50s B movie elements. Maybe you would have understood that if you would have, I don't know, let Lucas speak and listen to what he was actually saying instead of talking over him and telling him to shut up so you can insert your incredibly idiotic ideas that are a million times fucking worse than anything he was suggesting or explaining when it comes to the movie. But okay. All right. Tries to argue it's not a 50s B movie. Completely pointless, because it's not intended to be in the first place. And it just shows that he doesn't understand the formula of the Indiana Jones movies. Like, it seems like he gets it, but throughout the rest of the video, he just completely undermines what he's saying. He's talking about how, oh, it's this formula, and then he just doesn't get that King of the Crystal Skull was doing the exact same thing. It was having elements of a 30s adventure serial, and then having elements of a 50s B movie. And since it's a film that took place in the 50s, it had elements of 50s culture instead of 30s culture or 30s history, because that's not the time period that this film takes place in. And that's what Indiana Jones films were. They were movies that were homages to 30s adventure serials as well as the time that they were set in. And King of the Crystal Skull does the same thing. So it's like you don't even understand the formula that you're trying to explain to people in the video. It's just baffling. But then he starts to get back on track a little bit. He talks about other aspects of the franchise, other aspects of the formula, the introduction scenes to Indy, the supporting characters, female leads, the muscle, the villain, the sub-villain, so on and so forth. But this whole scene, this whole part of the video is just boring, because it just seems like he's just reading off from the Indiana Jones wiki. Then he takes a shot at the film's expense for the user base, calls it the Indy 4 excrement when he starts to transition to talk about it. Then he breaks down Indy 4 in comparison to the other three, and he talks about how it's missing details and ideas. Then he talks about how it's following the same formula as the other three, and he doesn't mind that, but he contradicts himself again, because he said in an earlier portion of the video that he didn't like the fact that it didn't stray away even further from the formula. So which is it? Which is it, Mike? Which is it, Plinkett? Oh, you want the film to be completely different and not really that much like an Indiana Jones film? Or do you want it to be more like a typical Indiana Jones movie, but just with a few tweaks? Like, what the fuck do you want from this movie? Then he takes more cheap shots at Lucas. Then he blabbers about how poorly Indy 4 handles details and ideas, how it feels like it's directed by 5 different people with numerous visions. I don't personally agree with that, but at least that's a criticism that you can kind of make some sense out of compared to the other stuff before this. But it's not a common occurrence throughout this video. Like, there's maybe 2 other times that he comes up with a criticism that I either get, understand, or actually agree with. The rest of the time, the criticisms suck, don't make any sense, are contradictory, or half criticisms. They're not even full criticisms. Then he complains about the film opening up with a scene that ties directly into the artifact that Indy winds up searching for. And I'm like, why is this an issue? So it's strayed away from a minor plot point, and that means that the film sucks? What? Oh, the other films in the series didn't do that, but this film does. Isn't that kind of what you were asking for anyway? I don't want it to do the same thing, but I do want it to do the same thing. Make up your fucking mind. Then he takes issues with Crystal Skulls, makes a predictable joke at Dan Aykroyd's expense, of course. And I'm like, okay, you're arguing that nobody knows what Crystal Skulls are, and they're obscure. And I'm like, more people know what a Crystal Skull is than the obscure Russian-ass artifact that you were fucking talking about earlier in the movie. In the movie review. Sorry. So used to doing movie reviews that I just kind of reverted back to the norm there. But seriously, more people know about the Crystal Skull because of Dan Aykroyd and his Crystal Skull vodka, or movies like The Phantom, than they know anything about whatever Russian artifact you were showcasing earlier in the video. Not really as good of a point as you thought it was. Then he takes aim at the opening with Indy in the trunk, makes some bullshit claim about Indiana Jones looking like a confused old man when you first see him, then continues to ramble about absolute nonsense for what feels like an eternity. Then he talks about how it's a problem that the main villain, the sub-villain, and the muscle are introduced in one scene, or that Mac has questionable allegiances. Once again, minor issues that are blown way out of proportion. Who gives a flying fuck when either of these three are introduced? Or about Mac's allegiance? Like, was that really a main factor in the quality or the entertainment factor of the previous three films? And somebody enlighten me on that. Was that really ever a main factor when it comes to those movies? I don't think so. I wasn't entertained and enthralled by the previous three films based upon the fact that the main villain, the sub-villain, and the muscle were introduced later throughout the movie. That never really came across to me. What I was entertained by and what I liked about those films was the adventure, was the action, was the journey of Indiana Jones finding the artifact. That is all still present in this film, despite the opening being different in terms of introducing these characters at the beginning instead of throughout the film. I mean, what kind of criticism is this? This is just such a nitpicky criticism. And so many of the criticisms in this video are just mostly nitpicks, or nitpicks that are blown up to extreme degrees. Then he rambles on more about how the rest of the scenes after the opening are dull because of the reveals early on. I'm like, yeah, the motorcycle chase, the numerous other action sequences, Marion's return, Indy deciphering the clues from Oxley, finding the temple, all of that is boring and dull because there aren't as many twists and reveals in the story. And I'm like, by that logic, Last Crusade was boring because Ilsa was an obvious twist with her being a Nazi, or that Donovan was a bad guy. So I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand the thought process here. And if anyone says, oh, well, it's not supposed to be taken seriously, it's a joke review, oh, it's like CinemaSins, it's satire. I'm like, no. Plinkett reviews have not been considered satire. That's never really been the case. They have jokes in them, but they aren't purely satire. And it's ironic that people might point out and use CinemaSins as an example, because CinemaSins is clearly being ripped off by Plinkett at one point in this video. I mean, it just feels like there's a whole portion at the end of this video that is just poor man's value brand CinemaSins. Then he talks about how bored he was during the ruin scene. I don't think that was the case. I don't think it was that boring. Then he says, I don't give a shit about Ox. Why should I care? And I'm like, the film introduced Ox as an important character during the diner scene. He's the one that wrote the letter that Mutt got, that Mutt gave to Indiana Jones. you find out that Ox had a connection with Indiana Jones. They were friends. Ox is the only reason why Indy is trying to find the skull in the first place. You're talking about lack of intrigue after the opening scene, and you have it here with Oxley and his mysterious disappearance. So I'm like, are you just fabricating shit? Are you just making things up? Because that's what it sounds like at times. Like he's just making up criticisms to make the film sound worse than it really is. Another good example of that is the rant about the part-time quote. Because it's so apocalyptically awful. It's so bad. It's just pure ear poison. And I'm like, it's not the best take ever, but I've never hated it. I've never thought it was as awkward as people made it out to be. It's just a average take. Maybe some of the takes might be better, but I've seen people do edits with those takes in the film and they sound off. Maybe it's because of the sound editing or the mixing or whatever, but I don't think they necessarily sound better. And even if you don't like that scene, it's like 3 seconds. It's not enough of a reason to hate the film. Then he talks about how Spankoff is a fraud because she can't read Indy's mind. Says her mind control plot is dumb and it won't do anything because mind control isn't real. And I'm like, it's a movie. Like, I know you realize this. It's a fucking movie, man. Like, mind control, yeah, no, it's not real. You can't read other people's minds, but it's a movie and there's no mind-reading alien skulls that exist in reality. Just like there's no ghost-filled face-melting arcs, magic glowing stones, or a holy grail, or 1,000-year-old grail knights. And this is a serious criticism. This is another example of just stretching things. This is just so present and prevalent throughout this video. So many criticisms are just massive stretches. Like he's grasping at straws. Just trying to find any minuscule reason to hate on this movie. Mind control is dumb and unrealistic. No shit, Sherlock. It's definitely not realistic. It being dumb, I disagree with that. I thought it was kind of interesting. Was it executed as well as it could be? No. And there is an argument to be had for that. But he doesn't really do that. Just makes a dumb observation about how people can't read people's minds and it's dumb and it's unrealistic. Then he has another pedo joke about Indian kids from Temple of Doom. That's like the second pedo joke. What is up with these pedo jokes, man? Like, does somebody need to do some investigating, Mike? Like, what? I forgot how many pedo jokes Plinkett did in these reviews. Talks about how the stakes didn't seem high enough because Spankoff didn't know exactly how to use the skull. This is a particularly dumb criticism. Because he only levies it at this film. And I'm like, this is an aspect of every other movie in the series. Every other script from every other film in the series has villains that don't know what the fuck to do with these relics. I mean, it's the same fucking thing every time. Belloc and the Nazis had no fucking clue how to use the Ark, and the script never showed how they would use it in any detail other than use it as a weapon, just some Bible scripture, and that was it. The Sankara stones are even more vague. The Grail was equally so. Just some vague stuff about making an immortal army. But just like all these other films before, all the plans for the villains and all of the plans that they had for these relics, they were turned upside down. Not always by Indy, but by themselves because of choosing poorly and not knowing all the details. Spankoff's defeat is structurally identical to every other major villain in the franchise. They thought they could control the relic, and they thought wrong. But somehow, this flaw only exists now in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Bullshit. It's not even a flaw to begin with, because if it was a flaw, it would be considered such in the other films, and it's not. It's not to him, and it's not to other people. So it's not a flaw in the first place. It's just another instance of people just wanting to hate on Indiana Jones for reasons. For reasons that are just about as vague as a lot of the explanations that the other films had when it comes to the way that these villains were going to utilize these relics. in their favor. This portion of the video is just more proof the main criticisms, or at least most of them, are off the mark or they're completely hypocritical. Then he has this whole bit where he's acting like Indiana Jones helping the Russians was an example of him not seeing them as a threat. And I'm like, did you not pay attention to the fucking movie? He was helping the Russians for the time because he didn't want Marion, Mutt, or Oxley to get killed. He didn't want them to get hurt. He even references this in a scene where Mutt is getting mad at him for being upset that he decided to come up with an escape plan. Indiana even fires back at Mutt at that time and explains this. You could have gotten us killed. That was the whole point. Pay attention. When you have to literally leave out aspects of the script to make your criticisms, you're not making a fair critique, let alone a good one. This review is a prime example of this. Then he talks about exchanging the skull was of little consequence because either Russians or Indy could take it to Akator and find the temple, and talks about some other elements of the script and how they could be better. And this is like the first time that Plinkett has a criticism that I honestly kind of agree with. I think this might have been a good time to switch some things up. The idea of Spankov using the skull to pacify others or turn the FBI agents on her side, actually not that bad. Ties into the speech she had in the film about doing that very thing. But it's like, it took over 20 minutes into the review for Plinkett to actually stumble upon a valid criticism and a good idea. And it doesn't become a common occurrence after this. Because then he starts ranting about the treasure at the end, and then he talks about how it's competing with the National Treasure movies. And I'm like, no, it's to show that the aliens themselves are archaeologists, just like Indy. It's just meant to be kind of a cool parallel between the two. It's not meant to be competition with National Treasure. Then stumbles upon another good criticism about Mac, about how Indy was dumb continuing to bring him around. But at the same time, there has to be some way for Spankov to be able to stay on Indy's trail. So unless the idea is just to use mind control, I don't really feel there was another way to do that. Unless you want to do something even stupider and even lamer, like the villain in Dial of Destiny, and just make it so he just miraculously knows where to go next. Or Spankov knows where to go next. My bad. Got the two villains mixed up there. But other than that option, I don't even know if there was another option to have Spankov be able to stay on Indy's trail other than Mac tagging along, leaving behind trackers. But maybe mind control. Maybe you could have done that. Praises a few aspects of the film at this point. But of course has to throw in a dig at the film. Even when he's talking about the good things, the things that he liked about it, he says, oh, it won't take long. Like, oh, don't worry, it won't take long. And this is the part of the review that really did make me think that a lot of the hate for the film was fake. It was manufactured and wasn't genuine. Because he praises so many different things about this movie. For a film that he supposedly hates and he loathes and thinks is a rolling turd, he praises the direction, which is a large part of the film. He praises the opening scene with the Russians in the 50s teens, parts of the opening action sequence with Indy swinging and missing and then hitting the truck. He praises parts of the atomic bomb scene, including even the sequence where Indy's looking up at the mushroom cloud. The diner sequence, the motorcycle chase that came after, some of the practical effects, Mutt turning the tables on Indy to tell him to hold the corpse, the fight on the anthill. And these are all things that I like. But this just raises more questions for me because he says, oh, I really liked the diner scene and it did a good job with exposition. But earlier in the review, he says he doesn't care about Oxley. So you like the exposition in that scene, but you still don't care about Oxley? Also, there was a point in the review where he says, oh, after the opening scene and after they reveal everything, all the other scenes that come after are dull. But then says that he likes the diner scene and he likes the motorcycle chase. So I'm like, so those scenes aren't dull now? So that statement was false. That statement was bullshit to begin with. So it just makes you question the integrity of this entire review. Because this isn't a one-time thing. This happens often throughout this video with these contradictory statements. So, yeah, you list off all these things that you like about the movie for a movie that supposedly sucks so much, and the film is really bad. The film is a turd. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I think you didn't necessarily hate the movie. You might have had some fun with it, but you didn't want to piss off your user base, so you just made a video where you hated on the movie for clicks. That's what it seems like. That's really what this video plays out like. And then he goes and talks about his bad ideas, the bad ideas of the film, and says that these are objectively bad ideas. Even though there's no such thing as an objective opinion. Everything's all subjective, but okay. All right. You know, this is crazy to me because everything is subjective when it comes to opinions on films or even food. I mean, to me, the idea that pizza rolls are actually good is subjective. It's not an objective thing. The pizza rolls are good. Just like it's not, these aren't objectively bad ideas. So here are his 6 objectively bad ideas. Number 1, making this movie. Cheap shot. Just lazy attempt at humor. 2, bringing back Marion Ravenwood. Why? Why is this a bad idea? Why is this objectively a bad idea? He points out how Marion's just a driver, and Marion is just really not really doing that much, but then he just belittles and undermines Marion as a character. Acts like she wasn't that big of a deal. She was just some fling that Indy had in Raiders, and their connection wasn't especially strong compared to any of the other women in the series. Acts like she's easily replaced, shits on her for her appearance, and just relatively just dogs her for the entire segment, and even continues to do it throughout the rest of the review. So I really like to know what Mike's fucking problem is with Karen Allen, because I don't get it. I don't know why anyone would have such a problem with Marion as a character, let alone think that Karen Allen is somehow someone that you just settle for in a relationship, because that's a point he makes later in the movie. Nobody wants her. They want Allison Doody, and I'm like, no, I'm fine with having Karen Allen, and I would be blessed to have someone like Karen Allen in my older age as my significant other, because she's sweet, she's charming, she's smart, and she's an amazing person. She's a talented actress as well as a wonderful person. Like, that's not settling for anything. Like, that's hitting the jackpot. Then he talks about, the third point, which is having Mutt do things. And if we're talking about Mutt swinging with monkeys, yes, that's stupid. But he goes on this rant about Mutt being able to fence like it's such a crime. And I'm like, I didn't mind that. It gave him something to do. It was like, oh, well, that's the problem. You should just ride around on a motorcycle. I'm like, well, that's fucking boring. Like, what would he even do riding around on a motor? Like, what would even be the point? Oh, he's riding around on a motorcycle in a jungle? Like, what would be his place in an action scene at that point? You effectively make him useless. So I'm fine with him having a skill. Didn't bother me. And it's interesting. He says he likes the character, but doesn't like it when he does things. So it's like you just like the idea of Mutt, but you don't like him doing anything. So it's like, oh, so you just want Mutt to be there, but just stick a thumb up his ass for the majority of the movie. I can't get behind that. I really can't. Then he rants about Mac and how he's a shitty character. Kind of agree. Not the best character in terms of the writing. Then rants about the quicksand scene, how it's shot on the soundstage. It's the low point in the movie. You can't use a snake as a rope. It's laughable. It's bad. And I'm like, I never hated that scene. I got a kick out of it. I remember when I saw it in the theater, people were laughing. It's just a fun little moment of levity. And yeah, it's a way for Indy to know that Mutt is his son, but it works. And because I actually like Karen Allen, and I think she's a talented actress, and I like her in the film, I like the banter between her and Harrison in that scene. Then number 6 is just the rest of the movie, because the rest of the movie sucks. The UFO stuff, the aliens, the scene with the waterfall, typical cliched stuff that every other critic who hates on this movie mentions. I was surprised he didn't mention Nuke in the Fridge. I will say that. I was shocked he didn't mention that. Then he goes on this just weird part of the video. I believe this is part 2. This is the start of part 2 of the video. And this is just another example of just how this video is just so forced. And it's so ironic he's talking about how so many aspects of the movie are forced and don't come across as genuine. And this portion of the video and just so many other parts of the video come across the exact same way. He talks about how badass Indy was and how he's a man's man, how he punches people a lot and gets the ladies, and that's why he's popular and not the character himself. He oversimplifies Indiana to just a cliched male action hero. He argues the core appeal of these films is just Indiana punching people and being cool. And this is such a fucking dense take, no matter how you frame it. Saying it's not the character that people like, it's the idea of Indiana. It's not giving the character as a whole enough credit, and it makes Indiana his core generic action hero. And as somebody... And it's another reason why you can't take this review seriously. This is a guy who's supposedly being the voice of reason. I'm going to say that again. The voice of reason with Indiana Jones and what makes a good Indiana Jones movie. And he's just saying Indiana Jones as a character is inconsequential and doesn't really mean that much. And it's just the idea of him that people like. Just making him such a generic template. Just nothing special. He then shits on Harrison for being too old and not being able to keep up with his younger co-stars. And then he talks about how old Indiana isn't cool. What an amazing critique. Phenomenal critique there, Plinkett. Wow. I mean, where do you even go with that? Oh, Harrison's too old. Thinks Harrison's too old in this. Wonder what Plinkett thinks about Harrison and Dial of Destiny. He's a spring chicken in this compared to that movie. And I didn't think that old Indiana was somehow a shell of himself in this. He's still punching people. He's still a badass. He's still cool. So I disagree with that. I don't think old Indiana wasn't cool. And then he rants about how no one cares about what Indiana Jones does in the 50s or after the Last Crusade, or if he gets back together with Marion, which I don't get. No one cares? You don't care. That's it. A lot of fans cared. A lot of fans think that is really sweet and like the perfect way for Indiana to end his career and to spend the rest of his life with Marion. So saying no one cares is a bunch of fucking bullshit. You just don't care. And you just have a hate boner for Karen Allen for whatever reason. And her character, Marion. Argues a remake would have been better. I'm not kidding. This is actually a real point that Plinkett makes and Mike makes in this video. Argues a remake would have been better because you could see the adventures of a younger man and vicariously lives through them, completely dismissing Harrison's unique stamp on Indiana Jones and acting like anyone else could have played the role. He shows some fan films, acts like they show that is proof that you can cast anyone as Indy, and to me, that's another massive blow to this already bad review, and one of the bigger ones. Arguing with a straight face that a remake would have been better. No, it wouldn't have. It would have been so much worse. Because no one else is Indiana Jones other than Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford, his personality, his charisma, his unique inherent take on this character is what brought this character to life. I'm tired of people saying and arguing that you can cast someone else as Indiana Jones and it'll be fine, just like all the other James Bond movies or the superhero films and so on and so forth. Because those films are different. That's a different case. Because those characters were created in print. They were created initially in comics or in novels. Indiana Jones existed solely as a screenplay character initially. And when he was cast and Harrison Ford took the role, he made it his own and he put a stamp on it that no one else can do, that no one else can come close to. And we already saw this with Solo. The argument, oh, well, anyone can play Indiana Jones. Well, the argument probably was the same, that anyone could play Solo, and we all know that wasn't the fucking case with that shitty Solo movie, so no. I don't agree with that at all. And I don't agree with the take either that, oh, people just watch Indiana Jones movies to vicariously live through the adventures of a younger man. Like, no, I watch those films because I enjoy the action and the adventure. I like Indiana Jones, but I also like a lot of the other characters, the supporting characters, the villains. I like the aesthetic. I like the setting, the music, the effects, all these different things. Like, I don't just like the Indiana Jones movies because I want to vicariously live through Indy. And then he compares the Indiana Jones films to the Fast and the Furious movies. I'm not kidding. Like, he says, oh, people watch the Indiana Jones movies because they want to vicariously live through Indiana, who's a cool guy, and he's a badass, and he's awesome. Just like people watch the Fast and the Furious movies for the fast cars and the and the adrenaline. They don't watch those movies for Paul Walker, which is a hilarious take nowadays, because a lot of people watch the Fast and Furious sequels for Paul Walker, or Vin Diesel, not necessarily just for the fast cars. And to just compare the Indiana Jones franchise of all things to Fast and Furious is just so ludicrous to me. And he continues this bad take with a rant about how Indy's wardrobe is what makes the character. And I'm quoting this review here. The character is just the hat. Seriously. He seriously says the character is just the hat. So, I don't know how any Indiana Jones fan could watch this review, even if they're not a fan of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and come away from this review with a semblance or a shred of respect or appreciation for this garbage. Because you have a review that is not only saying that Harrison Ford is nothing special, Harrison Ford is easily replaceable, that Indiana Jones can be easily remade, and in fact, Indiana Jones 4 should have been a remake. It's saying that the character itself is just the hat, and people don't really care about the character. The character isn't why people like Indiana Jones. People like Indiana Jones because of the idea of Indiana Jones punching people and being cool. So, how can you be a fan of this character in this franchise and be clapping like fucking seals at this review, when this is the argument that Mike and Plinkett have? I know Mike and Plinkett are the same person, but you know what I mean. Then he talks about how no one wants to get old, shames Karen Allen again, says that no one wants to get a girl like her in the end, they want Allison Duty, and I'm like, once again, I would be lucky and I would hit the lottery if I got a girl like Karen Allen to live with and spend the rest of my life with throughout my old age. Then he discusses how Indy 4 is a lame, watered-down version of the other three. Once again, not mentioning that Last Crusade was Diet Raiders and even more watered down. Yes, it might technically have a higher body count, but most of it happens off screen. And I do find it's crazy that a lot of people just gloss over this, that Last Crusade started this trend. It wasn't Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Last Crusade started the trend of being safer and being more for the whole family. And then he does this whole part of the video where he's talking about how Indy doesn't murder anyone in Indy 4, and that's why it's bad. And I'm like, is this supposed to be funny? Because if it's supposed to be funny, it failed. Because it's not funny. It just comes across as idiotic. And yeah, just arguing Indy 4 sucks because Indiana doesn't murder more people. That's really what it comes down to. But once again, he has to leave out things to make his point and make it seem worse than it really is. Because he leaves out the Russian who Indiana punched into the anthill, which is funny because he said that's one of his favorite scenes from the film. But then when he's talking about all these moments where Indy murdered somebody in the movie, he only points out the guy who got the dart pushed back into his throat. He can't even make this simple point without fucking something up. It's crazy. And I know this video is almost an hour long, almost as long as the review is, but there's just so much that I had to unpack and so much that I had to discuss when it comes to this video. So buckle up, bear with me. The ride is almost over, but I got more to say. Then he says this joke. This is easily one of the most unfunny, just bad jokes I've heard in a Plinkett review or just in any review period. This movie's, I'll try to do his voice. This movie's fucking weak. Like Shark Week. I mean, not like sharks, but the Discovery Show. I don't like it. That's an actual joke in this video. Did you laugh? I know I didn't. Then he complains about Indy just saying Russians instead of Russians. I hate these guys. What is this? This is an inconsequential, useless criticism. Is this supposed to be a satire of over-the-top negative reviews of the movie? If that's the case, then it's brilliant. If not, it's just bad. This is really fucking bad. Talks about how odd it is that Indy worked for the U.S. in World War II and the briefing scene in general, and then admits it's not really a bad example of the script, but it's just an odd choice. And I'm like, you're just struggling. You can hear him straining to come up with more criticisms for this movie at this point. Rants about McCarthyism and its inclusion in the movie, and just talks about how the fear of communism is rather pointless and doesn't really add anything to the movie, and blah, 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 blah. Just feels like just an excuse for him to provide a history lesson to the audience, throw in some bad puns, and that's about it. Just another example of just pure padding in this review. Then he attacks Mac's throwaway line, I'm a capitalist, like it's a big deal. It's one line, but acts like it's a big deal. Then talks about political subtext that's barely even a focus in the movie, just so we can say some big words like xenophobia. Then the next part of the video is just nitpicking. He goes after a weird audio take, talking about how unrealistic it is for tribes of people to be hiding in walls, complaining about Mac saying, I'm going to be all right before he dies, and he pronounces nuclear wrong. Why did Mac wait too long to betray Indy? Why did these boxes explode? Was Marion wearing a push-up bra? Either it's all a joke or it's just shitty cinema sense. Either way, it's awful. It really is. Then he does some more nitpicking about the ending. Some of it makes sense. Like, why does the 13 skeletons result into turning into one being? But then the rest are just more nitpicks than anything else that aren't really that major when it comes to legit criticisms. You know, then talks about how there's a lot of scenes in the movie that are just the same as the other three. And he even says at one point that there are other films of the franchise that also do this, which I'm like, okay, the other films did it too. So what is the problem with this movie doing the same kind of stuff? And some of the stuff is a stretch, like, oh, Indy looks down and sees something down below. I'm like, what? Then he talks about how the realism was gone, the grittiness, and the perpetuity of the violence. And then he talks about how it wasn't that realistic of a franchise, and even agrees with the fact that some of the criticisms against the movie are a little bit much in terms of being unrealistic. But then he talks about how it's bad because the grit was wiped away completely, and it was the first time that happened. And I'm like, no. Do people have a Mandela effect going on with The Last Crusade? I'm starting to believe that. Like, people have a Mandela effect going on with that movie because they seem to think that that is not the start of the family-friendly approach to Indiana Jones, where things got more tame. Because it is 100% the start of it. It started the trend of playing things more safe and toning things down. It's not King of the Crystal Skull. Then he talks about gun squibs and shows footage from like RoboCop and talks about how, oh, the film didn't have scenes where people get shot and there's blood. And I'm like, it's PG fucking 13. And we're talking about 2006 PG-13, not 80s PG. You're not going to see blood squibs. So why are you even arguing this? Why is this even a point? Then he talks about stuff like Indy dropping the gun and then running away. I'm like, it kind of is a good point. But discussing the unrealistic action is absurd. But he then, once again, is saying, oh, that's not really that big of a deal, but there's no grit. And then I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're saying that it's unrealistic and it's cartoonish and the action sequences are silly in this movie and they're not just as silly as some of the other movies. It's like he's just hiding behind it's not gritty as an excuse to just argue that the action in the film is unrealistic. And then he continues the videos of just more bad takes, more bad, unfunny skits, and doesn't really have anything concrete to really say other than, oh, Spielberg and Lucas are old. They're old at this time. They're grandpas. They don't have balls anymore. They don't know how to, make a good Indiana Jones movie because they're old and blah 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 blah. And the video finally ends, and I'm like, thank fucking God I don't have to ever watch this shit again. I know, yeah, it's like 57 minutes, but I mean, there's just so much wrong with this fucking video that it just was gonna be a video that was this long. But anyway, hope you enjoyed my lengthy rant on the Mr. Plinkett review of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.